Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Matthew Ricketson, and on behalf of the Geelong Regional Library Corporation, I'd like to welcome you to the library's online author event today with Dr. Norman Swan, and it's about his new book, So You Think You Know What's Good for You. The Geelong Regional Library Corporation acknowledges the Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar original owners of the lands on which their library services operate. They pay respect to Wadawurrung and Eastern Maar elders past, present and emerging. They acknowledge and celebrate the First Nations peoples of this land as the custodians of learning, literacy, knowledge and story. So thanks very much for joining us today. We're expecting around about 100 of you to log in from various locations, and you are all very welcome. But first, some brief housekeeping reminders before we begin our discussion. You can participate in this live webinar by clicking on the Q&A button and typing your question or comment. You may need to touch your screen first to see the Q&A function pop up if you're using an iPhone or an iPad. Also, this webinar is being recorded, and if you'd like to watch this discussion again or recommend it to friends or family, it will be uploaded to the library's YouTube channel within the next couple of days. And now, just to provide you with a little bit of background about myself before coming to our guest. I've worked as an academic and as a journalist for the past 4 decades. And as a journalist, I worked on staff at The Age, The Australian and Time Australia magazine, among other places. I've also run journalism programs in 3 universities, including Deakin University, where I'm currently a professor of communications. And in a shameless piece of self-promotion, I will mention that the book that I have done most recently, a co-edited book with Andrew Dodd entitled Upheaval, Disrupted Lives in Journalism, has just been published by New South in June this year. It's a collection of personal stories from more than 50 Australian journalists who witnessed seismic changes in the media over the past decade. So with that piece of self-promotion out of the way, I will now turn to our guest author, and it is absolutely my very great pleasure to introduce Dr. Norman Swan. He's one of Australia's most frequently heard and well-recognised doctors, and over the past 18 months in particular, having become one of the country's foremost authorities on COVID-19 since the pandemic began. Trained as a general practitioner and then in paediatrics, Dr. Norman Swan was one of the first medically qualified journalists in Australia and has been a broadcaster for well over 3 decades, primarily but not only with the ABC and primarily but not only with Radio National's Health Report, which has been running since he began presenting it in 1985. He also, as many of you no doubt know, hosts a daily podcast, the Coronacast. He reports on the 7:30 program on television in the evening, is a guest reporter for Four Corners, appears on The Drum, occasionally on Q&A, and also occasionally on Radio National's breakfast program in the mornings. So with that, because clearly Norman hasn't had enough to do lately, he's written a book as well, which is the subject of today's conversation. So you think you know what's good for you. And I wanted to begin by just looking at something on the cover of the book and then what's on the inside, because the tagline at the bottom of the cover is that it is the ultimate health guide from Australia's most trusted doctor. And then inside there is an important note to readers on the kind of contents page, which says that the information and suggestions in this book are for your consideration only and may not be suitable to your particular circumstances. We're not recommending that people eat certain foods or follow any particular dietary advice. This is particularly so if you have allergies or other conditions that may give rise to adverse reactions to certain foods or diets. Neither the author nor the publisher accepts any liability or responsibility for any loss or damage suffered or incurred as a result of undertaking or following any suggestions contained in this book. And so, Norman, I just wanted to ask you if, to begin with, the contrast between those two things, badged up as the kind of, you know, Justice League almost standard superhero on the cover, and yet the legal liability or disclaimer on the inside. What's that about?
A couple of things before we go on. One is I'd like to acknowledge country myself. I'm talking from Gadigal land of the Eora Nation in New South Wales, and I pay respect to past elders, present elders, and most importantly, all future elders. And we might get on to talk about the pandemic a little bit, but the one of the themes in the book is control and control of your destiny. And Aboriginal communities are really good at exerting that, and they've done that through the COVID pandemic really, really well. And I acknowledge that work too. And just a little correction to your intro. I've never trained as a general practitioner. That's too hard for me. Much easier to be a subspecialist. So I trained in pediatrics. Okay. So on the front of the book is the marketing blurb, which is there to entice you to buy the book, not my words. And the inside is literally the usual legal disclaimer, which is don't believe a word this bastard's telling you, because he might be wrong.
Okay, well, so where do we stand in between those two things? Because I mean, as a journalist, then as fellow journalist, really, it's believe it in terms of how I've written it and how I've referenced it and where I've got the information from. Don't take my word for it is really, and I've always had that view in terms of journalism and broadcasting and in the health area, any other area, is have I properly referenced it? Have I given you a source for it? Is it well argued? And you make up your own mind. And in fact, that's one of the drivers for the book, is that I get really fed up with health books, particularly health books written by doctors. They're often wagging their finger at you, telling you you've been living this life that's been dissolute, and if you don't follow what I'm telling you to do, you're going to die miserable and young. I'm overstating it, obviously, but that's often the thing. And as H.L. Mencken, the American humorist, said about a century ago, for every complicated problem, there's a simple solution, which is always wrong. I'm paraphrasing it. And so in the book, I've really treated you, the reader, as an adult, that you are going to make up your own mind. What are your choices in life? What are the things that you want out of life? And I'll offer you a bit of a menu, and you can make up your mind and decide on the basis of the evidence. I don't tell you what to do at any point. It's a bit idiosyncratic, is that it follows my interests and what my interests have been over the years, which is really that there are no simple solutions, but we get too worked up about things that look like simple solutions, but we kind of know intuitively they're not. Yeah. Okay, so thanks for that. I mean, I would note there is about 50 pages of endnotes at the back of the book, which provide a lot of references that anyone who's reading your book can go to and check and so on. And absolutely, the tone of the book it's one of the things that struck me in reading it, that it's having been a regular listener and viewer of yours over the years. Within the ABC mold, there's a way in which information is presented, and so as accurately and dispassionately in general as possible. Whereas this book is there is much more of a tone to it, and a personal tone, which I personally found inviting. And as in I'm a bit of a schlub like you. Everyone's a bit of a schlub. Let's not think we're all Arnold Schwarzenegger or whatever, or Miss America. Let's kind of get down into the weeds with the sort of issues that we confront every day and work our way through them. So the use of the word, for example, a very un-ABC word, bullshit, appears regularly throughout the text, and the tone is quite, as I said, engaging and personal. Was that deliberate, or did you just find yourself doing it as you wrote it?
No, I've always tried to find a conversational tone when I've been writing, and people probably don't realize when you're not in the business is that when you are broadcasting, writing is an essential part. I mean, obviously what you've done, Matthew, over the years is longer form text, but when you're writing for radio and television, that is a skill in its own right. And you try to be conversational in that, and you've got to write for your voice. And I just love that style of writing, which is conversational. It's talking directly to you. When you're on radio, less so on television, when you're on radio, successful radio broadcasting is imagining a single person. You don't imagine hundreds of thousands of people out there. You're talking to one person and your voice is directed to them. And that's what I've done in this, is I've tried to find a voice to a single person when I'm chatting to them, and I'm chatting to them in my own voice.
Okay, so let's go back to, I mean, you were born and grew up in Glasgow in Scotland in the 1950s and 60s, in a Jewish family, and one of the striking passages in the book is about the Jewish diet and how extraordinarily unhealthy it appears, which I was struck by, because thinking about the kind of virtues of chicken soup for curing children of ailments and so on, and adults. So could you tell us a little bit about that? Because I was really quite taken aback by that.
Yeah, I mean the traditional Jewish, at least Western, Ashkenazi, so-called Western Jewish diet is really a Russian, German, Middle Europe, Middle Ages almost, not quite Middle Ages, but 19th century diet. It's heavy in carbohydrates, heavy in saturated fat, a lot of meat, and well, at least increasingly as you got wealthier, more meat, and a lot of salt. And that's really the diet. Now, if you look at the Russian diet as it is now, it's very similar. A friend of mine went to give, she's a professor of psychology in London, and she went to give a series of lectures in Estonia. And what's interesting is that we grew up in Glasgow with certain kinds of food and certain ways of actually pronouncing the names of the food. And when we went to visit Jewish friends or family in London, they had different food, actually. And they had different names for different things as well. And the bakery that you got in Glasgow was just different. You couldn't find it in Manchester, in Jewish communities in Manchester and London and so on. And she gave a lecture tour in Estonia. And she phoned me up from Estonia and said, I'm out having, I think she was in a Catholic home, and she was having a Jewish meal, a Glasgow Jewish meal. And I think what happened was that there was a migration from the Balkan states in Estonia to Glasgow, part of it. And that kind of dominated the Glaswegian Jewish diet. But if you look at it, we tend to think that diets that have been around for a long time are good for you. And they're very situation specific. And so if you look at, say, the Amish in North America, those are the people who live in a kind of medieval, middle-aged lifestyle. They don't accept modern technology and so on. They eat that kind of diet. So there are a huge number of calories a day, lots of fat, lots of carbs. And yet they don't get a lot of heart disease, don't get a lot of diabetes, they're not very fat, because they're expending about 6,000 calories a day, because they're doing stuff all the time. And of course, it's all situation specific. So the Jewish diet would have been similar, is that unhealthy today, but has less impact on you if you're schlepping a cart around all day, gathering wood and taking it home, selling your wares from a cart, and you've got to push it at the end of the day in cold weather.
Yeah, okay. So, all right. So you mentioned a lot of, in the book, there's quite a lot of discussion about health and the relationship between, they're all interconnected, health, mind, body, food, diet, exercise, and so on. And you pay quite a bit of attention early on to what you describe as your Pinot Noir shaped abdomen, which I thought was a lovely image. And so it's
not when you see it, Matthew. It's not when you see it.
I was thinking of a glass of Pinot, actually.
Yeah, right.
But no, it's a lovely description. I'm interested in how much seems to be interrelated, and as you say, situational. That is, diets and so on. But let's start with diet, and because you have a long section at the beginning of the book about diet.
Before you go down that track, because I think it's worth capturing that important idea you just mentioned, and it comes really very early on in the book to kind of frame what we're doing. And one is that there are no simple solutions. So if you're looking for a simple solution, buy Pete Evans or buy one of the other health books on the market. But if you're looking for a solution that might work for you, then I think it's probably buried in here. And the first thing I say in the book, very early on, I should say, not this one, is that one of the misconceptions we have, even though we know it's not true, but we've all got it, is that the mind and the body are separate. We've got this idea that they're two separate things. It goes back to Descartes hundreds of years ago, philosopher who talks about dualism, the mind-body split and so on. There is no split. The mind and the body are one. But we kind of push back on this. So if a doctor says to you, you know, I know you're feeling this pain and the pain's all too real, but you're depressed at the same time, we really should be treating the depression because it could help the pain. People resist that idea because, oh, he's saying that it's all in my mind. But what the doctor's really saying is that it's all in your body, and your mind and your body are one, and they're intricately linked. And you cannot separate the two. And this is not soft science. This is hard science. How we respond to our environment, how we think and feel affects our bodies, and what goes on in our bodies affects our brain. And you cannot separate the two. And therefore, if you're looking for something simple, it's just not going to work. So when it comes to diet, there's a lot of paradoxes in the book that I talk about. And one of the early paradoxes, the title of the chapter is Forget the French, because we all know the French paradox. You smoke gitane and you have butter on your croissant, and yet you live a long time. I said, forget the French, the paradox is Greek. And it's about the second longest lived people in the world who are actually Greek Australians living in Melbourne, usually first generation. And this illustrates, to me, this illustrates why I first came across this paradox very early on in my broadcasting career when I met a researcher at Monash University who went on to Cambridge University, John Powles, who sadly died a few years ago. And what he had studied people from Lefkada, an island in Greece, who'd come and migrated to Melbourne. And he'd studied their siblings left behind. And he found that Lefkadans in Melbourne lived longer than Lefkadans in Lefkada. And not only that, they lived much longer, 6 years longer on average than Melburnians of Anglo-Irish extraction. And he and others, and more recently, researchers at Deakin University, actually, Tanya Thoris, Catherine Itsiopoulos, and others, they have taken this further and shown again what John Powell showed all those years ago. And people say, well, they're the longest of people. You say, well, I know exactly what that is. It's the Mediterranean diet. Well, that's a bit of it. But these are older Greek Australians, by the way. And the more Greek they are, the longer they live. And there's a whole series of things that happen in their lives that add up to this picture. So one is the Mediterranean diet. So looked at simplicity, the Mediterranean diet is a lot of vegetables, not much meat, a lot of white food. You can just describe it very simply like that. But the cuisine is actually complex. And so there's this whole raw food movement, but actually cooking food is one of the things that's made us live longer. Because when you cook fresh herbs, vegetables, onions, garlic, olive oil, tomatoes together, you cook up anti-aging substances which are unknown at the moment, but you certainly couldn't buy them over the counter in a pharmacy. And they cook slowly, which means they're not burning food and they're not getting these aging compounds that you get on browning. They've got a backyard where they're growing vegetables, or they've got an allotment, a very Melbourne thing, got an allotment where they grow vegetables and their own herbs. So it's fresh. So there's no deterioration in the quality. And older Greek Australians, they hunt high and low for fresh produce, and they know what they're looking for. And then they eat with their family or friends. They're surrounded. Social support and the people around you are incredibly important for this health and well-being, how your hormones work, how it controls your cardiovascular system, your immune system. And they have either returned to the Greek Orthodox Church or they've never left it. But as they've retired, they've got more time for it. And the Greek Orthodox Church has 100 fast days a year. Now, these aren't Michael Mosley fasts, or in the Jewish tradition, Yom Kippur, where you don't eat or drink anything for 24 hours. These are best described as vegan fasts, where for 24 hours, for a day, they don't eat meat, fish, eggs, dairy. They just eat plant foods with a bit of olive oil on it. So you add all that up, and that adds to it. And people say, oh, well, it's bloody hopeless. I can't do all that. But the reality is, if you do any one bit of it, it's actually pretty good, particularly cooking slowly, cooking Mediterranean, or even Asian recipes. Asian recipes are quite similar in many ways. They just taste differently. But they cook fresh herbs, things together. They tend not to burn food. They might stir fry, but they don't get to that burning point. And they're using a lot of vegetables, not much meat. And in Asian communities, you eat with your family. There's a huge table of people around you.
Yeah. And
all
in
these
Jewish
things
families as well.
Yeah, all these things add up.
Yeah. Okay. So So that's about a whole picture, which is, as in that's one of the key elements is not just one element, but in fact it is a whole lot of elements.
It's a package.
I get that. You also mentioned as part of that, you mentioned burning food, and in the book you talk about the problems with barbecued food, which I didn't realize. I just didn't understand that. But what is that about? Is it cook out or burn out some of the nutritious stuff in your food?
No. So when you cook, let's say sofrito, which is the base for a lot of Mediterranean food. So that's onions, garlic, tomato, often carrots, and you cook that up. Those are anti-aging compounds. A lot of them are antioxidants, but they're anti-aging compounds. When you burn food or bake it, and it's not as if you don't eat any of this stuff, but if you eat too much, the caramelization on top has got substances in it, and a lot of this work's being done at the Baker Institute in Melbourne, called advanced glycation end products, AGEs or AGEs. And they're the opposite of antioxidants. They're pro-oxidants. So antioxidants stop biological rusting. So this is oxygen reacting with our body and rusting from the inside the same way as iron rusts. And that produces aging, it produces coronary heart disease, it's probably related to cancer, related to our tissues becoming more stiff and saggy. And antioxidants, not antioxidants that you buy off the shelf, there's no evidence that they benefit you, but antioxidants in your food and cooked food make a difference. What these substances are the opposite. They're pro-oxidants, and they speed up aging. They speed up these processes. And so it's not that you're burning off the antioxidants, it's more that you're creating a new substance which causes problems for you.
Okay. So what does that mean for the traditional Australian barbecue in that sense?
Cooking at Weber with the door shut, lots of moisture.
Okay, all right.
Yeah.
Well, other kind of.
Having said that, I still like the occasional bit of burnt meat. It's not as if you don't have any of that, but yeah.
Yes, indeed. Just staying with the kind of, if you like, the food and drink side of things at the moment. You talk quite a lot about the various sort of fasting fads that have come to the fore in recent years. What's your assessment of them, and drawing on the literature you've read, etc. as well?
Well, they work in terms of weight loss. So our current theme in the book is that metabolic stress, where you stress your body physically, is actually good for you. It has anti-cancer effects. It probably promotes nerve growth in the brain. So this is things in the exercise terms. It's high intensity interval training where you're pushing yourself, relaxing, pushing yourself. Now, the caveat here is if you've got coronary heart disease, you probably don't want to do that. You want to get advice to do that. But if you actually do push yourself a bit, and with food, if you occasionally deprive yourself, then it does turn out to be quite good for you. And it also helps with weight loss. It's very hard to maintain. So there's various forms of this. There's the 16-8, where you don't eat from the evening before until till lunchtime the next day. So you can essentially skip breakfast. And the other is the 5-2, which is the Michael Mosley. So they work. They have a bit of an anti-diabetic effect, and they do help you lose weight, but they're hard to sustain.
And they're hard to sustain. Why? Is it just we don't make them habitual, or what is it?
Well, I think the easier one to sustain is probably, although there's no evidence to back that up, is the 16-8, where you just learn to skip breakfast every day. By the way, children should never skip breakfast. That's a really bad idea. They don't perform as well at school. But skipping breakfast is much easier.
Their minds and bodies are still developing, presumably.
Yeah. That's right, and they just don't have the backup, the reserves that you have as adults. The other reason is that when you're out and about and you're mixing with other people, unless you sort of shrink into yourself and somebody else is absolutely in sync with your 5-2, eating is such an important part of socializing. It's very hard to maintain that. I'm sorry, I can't see you tomorrow night. It's my day on 500 calories. Well, let me tell you, life's not worth living if that's what you've got to do.
Okay, so that brings me to another. I'm just going to read a little section of the book because I think it goes to this issue, but also captures some of the tone, if you like. This is where you're talking about appetite. Declaration of interest. I've always battled with my appetite. If I'm at a drinks party, I can only devote 50% of my brain to the chat because the other half of my brain has to be fully deployed to stop me gorging myself on the nibbles. And if there's a buffet, I'm a goner. For a while, I went to a dietitian renowned for her straight talking and brutal honesty. At the first visit, she weighed me, then tut-tutted, measured my waist circumference, then sighed in an exasperated way and took a long dietary history, then shook her head. At the end of this, I sat waiting for what I assumed would be a nuanced weight loss regime. And what I got instead was, and you say you have to imagine a South African accent here, Norman, I won't do it. Norman, you eat a lot. You're going to be very hungry. Too true, you say, and it worked at least for a few years. So I don't think I'm giving away too many secrets to say that when we met before the session began, you were gobbling down some lunch. So there's a social component of food, which you mentioned, which is important, but there's also what you're saying here is grappling with your own, your own desires. As a person, you like to eat a lot, you enjoy eating a lot. So what have you found in that context, apart from the diet, or the advice which didn't quite work for you?
So what I curse is my childhood and adolescence, where I grew up in a Jewish family where if I went out to my grandmother's for dinner, the family dinner, and you didn't have 3 helpings, you were insulting her cooking. Yeah. And you don't have to be Jewish for that. Greek, Italian, yeah. Many households have that. You don't have to. And so you end up, or one end can end up at the end of adolescence, podgy, which is what I was. I've always fought with my weights. Now, research in Melbourne has shown, by Joe Peretta has shown that if you end up at the end of childhood a bit fat, your whole eating control system through hormones is set at that level. And it's very, very hard to change it. So you can lose weight, but then your body conspires to drive you back to that set point that it learned in childhood or even later in life. So it's a constant struggle. And what I've tried to do is find ways around that. And I'm really bad at eating slowly. I'm really bad at eating small portions. And the problem with not eating slowly is, and you saw me, I was sort of inhaling my lunch even there. And at the moment, I'm at quite a good spot in terms of my weight, is that I've eaten too much before my tummy realizes I've eaten too much. Yeah. It's just terrible. So all my behavior is entirely in the wrong direction. And I just look with unbelievable awe at people who can eat what they like and never put on any weight. And I do a lot of exercise.
Yes. All right. We'll come to that in a minute. But so each of us, or most of us, are flawed in one way or, there's something we're not.
If only that was my only flaw. If only that was my only flaw.
Yes. Okay. So let's assume for the purposes of argument, I might have a similar problem.
Which is hypothetically.
Hypothetically. Well, no. Okay. So I'm probably inclined to eat too much, like you, and before you know it, you haven't actually paid attention to how much do you really actually need to eat here, and possibly it goes back to adolescence. I'm not sure, but what have you? Because that obviously happened a long time ago in adolescence. And you've done various things to try and deal with that and combat that. What have you found for yourself that has been effective over the years, or has been more effective than other methods for you?
So first of all, getting a lot of exercise. Mind you, you've got to take a lot of exercise to counteract what you eat, but it does make a bit of difference. I use a food diary. So when I'm on a weight gain phase, I will actually start documenting. There's lots of apps around. I'll document the food in a food diary so I can actually see what I'm eating and I'm truthful about it, and you can get shocked by the calories that you're eating. I will try and slow down. For me, skipping breakfast does work. If I have breakfast, my appetite's up for the rest of the day, and I overeat. So I will try to have my first food of the day as late as possible. And what I try and do is have my exercise, fairly intense exercise, first thing in the morning, with nothing in my tummy, nothing else. Then I'll have a coffee afterwards, a short coffee, which helps to burn the fat and helps to kill the whatever hunger I've got, and then really wait as long as I possibly can before I eat. And I eat less during the day when I don't have breakfast. So those sorts of tricks. And I have been known to go, if I really go over, particularly if I'm overseas and just let it rip on a holiday, to go on a ketogenic diet for a while, very low calorie diet using shakes and so on. That does get you back down. But you got to really watch that, because you can get into a weight cycling thing and your body becomes more efficient and it gets even harder. My biggest success is really controlling my appetite during the day and a very gentle, slow reduction in exercise. And Boyd Swinburne, also at Deakin University, has shown that to actually get down to your ideal weight can take months, not days. And fast weight loss is not something that you really want to aspire to.
So in other words, resign yourself to the fact that sustainable weight loss may take time. That's one thing I'm getting from you. And the other is to kind of, if you like, toggle between trying various things and seeing how they work for you as distinct from anyone else. Like if it works for, say, your partner or your children, that may be great for them. But if it doesn't work for you, there's not much point, is there?
Yeah, and I try and eat a normal diet without anything faddish in it. So, you know, I've tried all this stuff. I've tried low carb, I've tried ketogenic, blah, blah, blah. And what I find is, if I can get to small amounts of a normal diet, then I can eat with other people, and I've just got to slow down. And what surprises me at the end of what would previously been a tiny meal, thinking you're going to give me that and expect me to be satisfied, I actually am satisfied. But you know, I have blowouts just like everybody else, and you know, and I have an addiction to tiramisu.
Okay, well, I'll disclose I have an addiction to donuts. So here we go.
Yeah.
we've all got our which is one of the things, as I said, I enjoy about the book. It's kind of, it is engaging and speaks to you, speaks to me because it's about it's about the variety of human experience rather than as you say, the tut-tut or the kind of prodding of your tummy sort of approach, which to shame you into doing something. Okay, so that said, what about I mean, exercise is clearly important, but is it possible, or is it possible to become obsessed with it and think that might be the answer or the solution?
Well, particularly, so anorexia nervosa does occur in men, and I do talk about that in the book. This book I can't remember if I said this already, but this book started off from ideas I got from young people in their 30s and 40s. And I was, for complicated reasons, I was giving lots and lots of talks, and they're very switched on. They're not drinking a lot, they're not smoking a lot, they're not using drugs a lot, they're very switched on to their health and well-being. And I discovered that the things that interest them are the interest in us all. And I've taken the themes that came out of the questions and answer sessions. There's no question and answers in this book, by the way, but it's the themes that came out. And I was really wanting to write for them, because I feel that millennials are badly done by in the health information that they get to. And that's what you read, the introductory paragraph there. So every section starts with a short paragraph. So if you don't want to read any more, you get your hit. And there's lots of jokes in there, and also say if you're getting bored, I tell you, if you're getting bored now, skip 2 paragraphs and come back again, and so on. Yeah. But so there's a lot about sex, drugs, and rock and roll, and there's a lot about eating, and there's a bit about eating disorders.
Yeah, and pornography and pornography addiction, and the possibility of that among young people and what's that about, and so on. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. So coming back to your question, is that men get anorexia nervosa too, but it manifests differently in men than women, and it manifests as a desire, you know, same sort of desire for the body beautiful, very, very, very little skin fat, down at 2 or 3%, the washboard abdomen, and being obsessed, going to the gym for hours a day and not eating very much. Women can have that too, but it's often worse in men, and a warning sign. And yes, you can. It's not necessarily bad for you to do all that exercise, but it can be a sign that there's something else going on with you psychologically. It's not if it's not interfering with your, one of the themes in the book, just to be clear, you talked about porn addiction and sex addiction, is that we love giving things medical labels. And I call that out in the book. These things are only a problem if they interfere with your life or somebody else's life. So watching porn is a very high percentage of the population watch porn at some point in their lives. They might not admit to it, but they do. And we don't have rampant sexual assault in the community. We do have more than there should be, and we do have more of domestic abuse, no question about that. But it's not rampant, it's not increased. The problem with porn is if it interferes with your life and the life of others. And so you believe that violent sex is good sex, which no woman would ever, as a man, you're a man, almost no women would countenance at all. Mm-hmm. And so on. So is this interfering with your life? And if you're going to the gym a lot and it's fitting around your work and everything else, and you're otherwise well, then do it by all means. It's the same with drugs. I'm not judgmental about drugs at all in the book, alcohol or other drugs. When I talk about ice, I'm not judgmental. Ice is quite a common drug amongst gay men, and a lot of them don't come to any harm from it, although it's a really bad drug. It's not inevitable that you come to harm, although you're on a knife edge. So I just give people the facts without being judgmental. That's the judgment and I talk about the ups and downs of daily life as well. So one of the reasons I hate the word wellness is that it gives you the view that there's somebody in this world who, and this is what we should be, is that we jump out of bed in the morning full of beans, flat abdomen or thin thighs, depending whether you're male or female, and perfect children, and et cetera, and they feel well all the time. And why don't we feel well all the time? Because most of us, we get up in the morning, you get a little bit of pain. Yeah. Because you exercised too much yesterday. If I think about it really hard, I've probably got pain right now. Most of us have pain. You get up in the morning and you feel a bit crap. And you only know that you're feeling well because of the days that you're feeling crap. But when crapness, excuse my language, dominates your life, stops you doing things, stops you enjoying life, and you never feel good at all, that's when it becomes something that you really do need to recognize early and get help with. As an example, and that's a recurrent theme in the book, is don't believe labels. It's when it's interfering with your life, or somebody tells you it's interfering with your life. You might not realize it, but they tell you it is. Yeah, so dispassionate and person, and or hopefully someone with some knowledge of you and of the issues. Just in that context, there's quite a bit of material in the book which sort of shows how advice about various issues, health and fitness and diet and so on, has changed over the years. And salt, etc., all sorts of things we now know more about than we did 20 or 30 years ago. And so the advice has changed on that, which from the point of view of the average person as a kind of citizen just going through their life, what do you recommend to how to deal with that? Because for example, let's make it concrete on advice about the amount you should drink or not drink, that is alcohol. I think the advice on that has changed quite a bit over the years. So how just the average person wanting to get through their life, how do you recommend you deal with that kind of stuff? Just keep up to date, or ignore it all, or what do you think? It's really tough. It's not just alcohol, it's food as well. So for example, doctors got this idea that fat was really bad for you. Yes. When really the fat that was bad for you was saturated fat. And so there was a vogue for low-fat diets. And the reason for that is if you have a low-fat diet, then you're going to reduce the saturated fat as well as all the other fats in your diet. And the mistake of that was that people swapped the fat for carbohydrates, and in fact made things worse. So we got fatter, and we also didn't help heart disease, because if you swap fat for carbs behave a bit like bad fats in your body. And so that wasn't very good. Now we know that it's not a low-fat diet that counts, it's the fats that you eat and the mix of fats in your diet. And so there is, and pediatricians have caused the epidemic of peanut allergy, because they've told parents, you're not allowed to eat solids, you've got to be very careful. Oh, and if you introduce peanuts, it's got to be doing tiny amounts. The advice on allergy is actually the way you induce allergy in children, by giving small amounts carefully and so on. Fascinating study of Israeli Jewish kids and Ashkenazi Jewish kids in London, sort of the same genetic stock, and comparing the two. And Israeli kids, by and large, don't get peanut allergy, and British Jewish kids do. And the reason is that Israeli kids, like Arab kids, are brought up and given peanuts in solids early in life. So their body gets used to it. And in large enough amounts, the immune system doesn't get trained against them. And so, and this is the recurrent theme. I can't remember now where you started the question, but so what you believe. And look, it's very hard because your doctors give this with great confidence, and sometimes it's wrong. And
well, sometimes it's the most benign, like we can come to the less benign in a moment, but at the most benign, the state of knowledge about the world, and health and fitness and all sorts of things, diseases and so on, it advances over time. Like that's, the notes in the back of your book are testament to that. So at the most benign, knowledge advances, and so substance X, which was seen as bad 20 years ago, is now not seen as bad, or it's just the advice is developed, as you were saying, with with various kinds of fats. It's not that we're now saying fat is terrific. It's more if you take it in certain ways, that's the problem, and so on. So that I'm just curious how
goes through their life on that stuff. So my solution for that is don't change things suddenly on a changing piece of advice. So when it comes to alcohol, they used to think there was a sweet spot of alcohol, that drinking no alcohol a day was bad for you. Drinking maybe 2 drinks a day was actually good for you. And then the risk increased from there. And that's wrong. That was wrong advice. What we know now is that it's a straight line from no alcohol through to lots of alcohol, straight line of risk. And maybe for people with heart disease, a couple of drinks a day is good for you. Women, alcohol is a problem because it can increase the risk of breast cancer. But a couple of drinks a day is fine. So if you do things to excess, then you've got a problem. And so I'm just trying to remember his name now, the writer who writes about food a lot, an American writer, Michael, it doesn't matter.
Oh, yeah.
He argues that you should eat a lot of green stuff, eat a lot of plants, not a lot of meat, and only eat food that your grandma would recognize as food. And not worry too much about individual nutrients and somebody saying this nutrient is the magic thing, or goji berries is the magic thing. Is that what you'll come away from this book thinking is how I cook, the ingredients I cook with, even if it's a bit of butter in it, because another of the paradoxes is the dairy paradox, is that a bit of butter is not necessarily that bad for you. And I'm eating this wholesome food, I'm not eating too much of it, I'm eating it with friends, you're going to be okay, even if the nuance around the edge changes. But if you're drinking to get drunk, and you get that's not good for you. And you kind of know that already. And you don't need the National Health and Medical Research Council to change its recommendations to know binging, and that is binging. When you drink and you get a bit drunk, that's binging. And that's not that good for you.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, well, so we should come to some questions now from various people who put things up in the chat. And the questions, I've got one that was posted earlier. So it's about, well, the questioner, Joe Stockdale, thanks you for being her go-to person for scientific facts and voice of calm and reason during the COVID pandemic. I'm sure you've been targeted by the anti-vax COVID denied movement. What's one of the wildest conspiracy theories you've been faced with, and how do you deal with these people?
I don't deal with them.
Okay.
They're undealable with, they're entrenched in their views. They're a tiny minority of Australians, maybe 2 or 3% of Australians. And even then within that, it's probably even a subsection of that. Most Australians are very sensible, don't believe that crap, and can easily, and so I don't even engage with it. If you look at my Twitter feed, 90% is trolling from people like that. And they're amplified by social media, and I'm not going to amplify them even more. The maddest is probably 5G, that you can catch COVID from 5G and just loop stuff.
All right, so that's, I mean, there are, I mean, I must say it's a very small minority of people who do, but there is a former colleague of yours, Ginger Gorman, who has written a book called Troll Hunting, where she explicitly engaged with trolls. That was on issues to do with abuse and so on, so it got
it's
very
bad.
difficult.
It's bad for your mental health.
Well, I think she would probably say, agree with you there. It's one of the reasons why I think her book is extraordinarily brave, that she actually did try and, engage with them. So, okay, so not undealable with people is one thing. We have an anonymous attendee who's asking you the question, how on earth do you maintain work-life balance? And thanks again for all your efforts in informing the nation. So, yeah, how do you maintain?
Well,
assuming you think that's a valid concept.
So it's one of my sort of bullshit phrases. So I've called out bullshit. So work-life balance is one of the bullshit sections in the book. Yeah. And this is a bit indulgent. So, the first thing you learn, almost the first thing informally that you learn in medicine, is do as I do, but not as I say. So work-life balance, I've got a problem with that term. So it's not just that I don't have work-life balance sorted out, but again, it's one of those things. Is it a problem? And do you have time for the things that count in your life, like your family and so on? And do you want more time with them rather than less time? And are you able to do what you need to do and maintain your friendships? And if you're not, then you don't have the balance right. Work is actually one of the most healthy things that you can do. One of the most unhealthy situations you can be is to be unemployed when you want to have work, because unemployment is a recipe for poverty, misery, and lack of agency in your life. You cannot take decisions about your life. And that gives you toxic chronic stress, which affects your whole body, mind, body again. So work is really important. When work becomes toxic is when it pushes you into a circumstance where you lose what psychologists call locus of control. And your locus of control is this sense of agency. Do I have the ability to make decisions about my life and act upon them to achieve what I want to achieve? And if your locus of control is internally, you've got good sense of that latitude to make decisions and choices over your life. I'm oversimplifying. But for many people, their locus of control is over there. A single parent with 3 kids on a pension. Well, over there is just poverty and the ability to bring that into yourself. Over there could be a bad boss. All sorts of things can take it away from you. You've got to try and bring it back to yourself. So I've been really lucky in my life where I've always, even an organization like the ABC, which every couple of years tries to exert control over me, I managed to flick it off and just get on with it. In a large enough organization, you can tend to flick it off. Sometimes it's harder than others. And that freedom is really important to me. And I work really hard and I work really long hours, but I play hard as well. And I see friends and I cook for them, and I don't feel that I'm in balance. I feel a problem at the moment, which is that I would love to be able to travel. I'd love to be able to get overseas, and I'd love a month off somewhere different. But I'm not going to get that for quite some time to come.
Mate, that's your problem right now. You wrote a book and you're out here talking. But yeah, I get that's an important point. It's about, and you say this very early on in the book, the control and having some agency in your life is actually one of the most important things, rather than feel you're being kind of pushed and pulled all around the place. I've got a couple of other questions that have come up, and this one is from Loretta Tagani, and she says, thanks for being the voice to us during the COVID crisis when our elected officials were silent. You're also an advocate for the bowel screen. I realise it's not conclusive and only an indicator of a bleed if it occurs. Tragically, I know of 6 men in my area in recent times who received the all clear after the screen at 50, only to die of bowel cancer afterwards, including my dear husband. Is this just bad luck, or are some labs not testing properly?
The test is quite good, the new test there. It's not quite as good as colonoscopy, but the government's not willing to pay for colonoscopy. And colonoscopy is an intervention which is, does have its side effects. So it's not it's far from perfect, and it does make errors. And there is a problem in Australia of younger men getting bowel cancer, and the screening program doesn't extend to that, and they don't do well because they're often diagnosed late. It is a real issue here, and we do need better screening tests, but this is the best that we've got, and it will reduce mortality from bowel cancer by about 30%, but some people may get missed. And that's why you repeat the test on an annual basis, because the first one might not be, you might have missed something.
Okay. Which reminds me, I should have do my annual bowel screening test. Thank you for that.
Definitely.
And thanks for that question. So this question is from Neil Stokes, and it's, what are your recommendations for women wanting to conceive, or those women who are currently breastfeeding? Should they have the COVID-19 vaccine?
You do not want to get COVID-19 when you're pregnant. It's a bad disease when you're pregnant. It's bad for you, and it's bad for the baby, unborn baby. So ideally, before you conceive, try and get immunized. But again, if the immunization becomes available while you're pregnant, the evidence is that it's safe, and they're doing it in the United States, and they're not picking up any signals of harm. And if you're breastfeeding, it's a really good idea to get immunized, because the antibodies, we're not yet immunizing babies against COVID. So the fact that you're immunized, the antibodies will be passed to your baby, and your baby will be, to some extent, protected against COVID-19 as well. So it's a really good idea when you're breastfeeding.
Okay. And I've also got one from Ashley Farnsworth, and they're asking, my son wants to get the AZ vaccine. I'd prefer him to wait for Pfizer. Is AZ safe for a 24-year-old?
Well, the risk of the clotting syndrome is about 3 per 100,000, about 1 in 30,000. If you look at New South Wales at the moment, as we speak, people are going to watch this on recording, but it's maybe 360, 370 cases. There are about 2% of those are in ICU, which is much higher than during the Victorian second wave. About 10% are in hospital, and many of those people are in their 30s or younger, or several of those from 30s or younger. So young people can get this quite badly. So a 1 in 50 chance of being in ICU in New South Wales at the moment, versus a 1 in 30,000 chance of the clotting syndrome. And in fact, the clotting syndrome, the chances of dying are 3%. So 3% of those people who, in the 1 in 30,000, go on to have serious disease and die, which is tragic, no question about that. But it is rare. So look, it depends on the circumstance. The recommendation is that under 60, you go for Pfizer and you wait for Pfizer. The question is how long. I think that if you're living in New South Wales at the moment, your metric is probably a bit different if you're living in Victoria with very little virus around. And you've really got to make your mind up for that with your doctor. I've had Astra, and I'm going to get my second dose a bit earlier because I just want to be covered. It might not be quite as good as 12 weeks.
Allowed to do that?
I'm just going to twist the arm of my GP to get it done.
Right.
So they're doing it in Britain, and the immune level is probably a bit lower than 12 weeks. But I live in New South Wales, and I just want to get covered. And I'm not recommending it to anybody else, but that's what I'm doing. And there's plenty of Astra around. So whether or not I can get it, I'll find out soon. I haven't actually tried yet, but it's going to do that quite soon.
Right. Okay. So
I'm not going to recommend for the 25-year-old. Your 25-year-old son's got to make up his own mind with talking to the doctor. The risk is higher than in over 60s, and it seems to be higher the younger you are. But the data for 20-year-olds, of course, there haven't been very many 20-year-olds who've had Astra. And what we really do need is more Pfizer around so that you don't have to make that decision.
Okay. And the other thing, I mentioned this maybe at the outset, but if not, I did want to ask you just for your observation on the way in which the media has covered this as an issue. It's obviously been the issue in the media non-stop for the past 18 months, and I'm not saying that shouldn't be, but what's your observation of the way in which the media in general has covered this pandemic?
Well, it's covered it predictably, where the News Limited press has tended to follow the federal government's line, not the state government's line. So they tend to be a cipher for the Prime Minister's office, who run interference on that. That why do we have lockdowns? These terrible state premiers are often Labour premiers, but they're not exclusively Labour premiers, by the way, going into lockdowns early. Isn't that terrible? We shouldn't be doing that. And look at New South Wales, the wonderful example of New South Wales. Well, living in New South Wales, I'm living with the bad policies of New South Wales, to be honest, which is if they'd gone into lockdown literally 2 days before they did, and gone into a 4 or 5 day lockdown, we would not be in lockdown now for 3 weeks, and it's probably going to be much more longer than 3 weeks. They're not doing enough to control that. So the News Limited press have run an ideological line. I mean, there are plenty of News Limited journalists who've tried not to, but they have. I've been personally attacked in the News Limited press. Again, probably the Prime Minister's office running interference and briefing them. So the Andrew Bolts, the Chris Kennys and others. Most of the press, though, even News Limited, most of the time are pretty good. We've actually got a pretty good standard of medical and health journalism in Australia. And the tabloids have always actually been quite good. We've never descended to the depths of the tabloids in the United States or Britain, where, you know, Martians invading the world or really crazy stuff. Very, very responsible. I take my hat off to tabloid journalists. It's really hard to do good tabloid journalism. Write briefly, yes. Go for that broader audience and really get to them with the sort of language that's just plain conversational language that gets to them. I just really do take my hat off to good tabloid journalists. And tabloids have done well, I think. Herald Sun, Daily Telegraph, and others. You've not seen a lot of, excluding the politically motivated journalism, you've not seen a lot of bad stuff. And I don't think you've seen a lot of amplification of the mad stuff. You've seen a lot of responsibility. So I spend a lot of my time at 7:30 on ABC television, and we agonize over our line on certain topics, where I know the evidence is such that I could be much more on the edge in terms of a story than we might choose to be, and still be absolutely defensible in terms of what we do. The thing about science and medical journalism is there's no balance. There's either evidence or there's not. There may be a debate about evidence, in which case you portray that debate. We've been talking about that a lot during this, about fats and carbohydrates and so on, there's yin and yang and so on. And if there's a debate, you reflect that debate. But smoking is bad for you. You don't, when you're doing a story about smoking, you don't actually have to do the other side.
Yeah.
And
yeah, true.
Pandemics, we've known how to control pandemics for hundreds of years. If you read about the plague and the Black Death, they controlled it the same way that we controlled COVID-19 in January and February, March 2020. Not a single textbook of public health will have to be rewritten because of COVID-19. People say to me, oh, how come you're always ahead of the things? It's because I've just read the textbooks. You know what was going to happen next. It's just that people in the Commonwealth government did not necessarily read the textbooks. People in the state governments did, by the way, and very hard to stay ahead of the state governments. Very easy over the last 12, 14 months to stay ahead of the Commonwealth.
Well, that doesn't, well, it induces some confidence and also some alarm, I have to say. But we might need to leave it there because we've run out of time. But thank you very much.
Well, just before going, I know where your alarm comes from. Is that, I mean, are you pulling? That's an important question. Are you pulling your punches?
No. My alarm comes from if the federal government is not reading the textbooks as you were. They're the federal government. That's what I'm worried about. They should have been reading the textbooks. That's what I'm worried about.
Yeah, well, they haven't. It took them until 3 or 4 weeks ago to accept airborne transmission of the virus, which is how it spread. You know, we're washing our hands, rubbing our surfaces, and so on. Yeah. And that evidence has been clear for years and years and years, and it took them until 3 weeks ago to come to the party on that.
That's okay. All right. Thank you very much, Norman, for the discussion today. I think it's been really, really informative and really interesting. I should just let everyone know or remind everyone that the So You Think You Know What's Good For You, Norman's new book, is published by Hachette, and it's available to borrow from the Geelong regional libraries. And of course, it's also available to buy from the event partners, Torquay Books, which is down in Torquay, and all other good bookstores, and no doubt some bad ones as well. And just for those in the regional area, anyone who purchases a copy of the book from Torquay Books using the link provided in the chat today will be also lucky enough to receive a copy that's been signed by Nolan Swann. So that link will also be sent to you in a follow-up email. So I'm just checking to make sure, is that link there? Yes, that link is there in the chat for anyone who wants to follow that up, who's either down in Geelong or in Torquay. So is there anything else that you want to say before we finish, Norman? Or
No, look, it's fantastic. I'm delighted to be able to talk to you. Thank you for inviting me. And yep, and it's great that people have participated and interacted with us.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. It's been a really good discussion and really good questions coming in as well. So on behalf of the Geelong Regional Libraries, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today, and hope you have a good day. And as a Victorian, I'm glad to be in Victoria right now. But all the best to you,
right.
Thank you very much again.
Thanks very much. Bye.
Bye.